Welcome to NPTEL module on strategic trade and protectionism theories and empirics. We are on the second week of this particular MOOC course, where we are discussing on the theories, classical theories of international trade, especially Adam Smith theory to Ricardian model of international trade, where we have been trying to understand in the couple of lectures back, where how the Adam Smith theory, or even before that, how mercantilism has been actually criticized because of many redundant or because of many fact assumptions they consider, which are quite unrealistic in nature. In this connection, I feel we are supposed to understand in a deeper format. We should actually imbibe certain realistic assumptions of the model, even if it is classical phase. Their assumptions are different, their situations are different, but we must understand it very differently based on the modern thinking of the classical theory. So, myself Dr. Pratap Singh Mohanty, a faculty member of IIT Roorkee, attached with the Department of Humanity and Social Science. So, this module number 9 will talk about this particular lecture number 9 will further deep down to the understanding of static to dynamic comparative advantage theory. We know that comparative advantage theory initially proposed by David Ricardo in 1817, and we again let me mention that Ricardo is in fact was in fact a theorist, as well as he was also a parliamentarian, also a trader who believes strongly on abolition of corn laws, which was discussed in the week number 1, and how we should prepare for the exam in between as well. If you, how we should derive contents out of it. Please try to look at the slides and its points very carefully. If you do not do that, probably some of the questions, largely the questions will frame from the PPTs and the content on the textbook I have suggested in my first week of the module. So, to have a deeper understanding, always all the slides have been connected like first week slide connected to the second week slide. Now, suppose I am explaining David Ricardo and its contributions towards comparative cost advantage. We must also simultaneously try to understand how David Ricardo is actually famous and what is the evolution of the theories till David Ricardo. So, make it very clear receiving the fact before David Ricardo. So, let me explain, since we did not explain the assumptions categorically in the last lecture for David Ricardo and its comparative cost advantage. In this particular PPT or in this particular lecture, we will talk about even in detail about how classical theory or the comparative cost advantage theory is interpreted in terms of static to dynamic format over a period of time by including various other factors. So, now let us go by the strict assumptions which was made by David Ricardo. First assumption, there are several strict assumptions in fact. First assumption was fixed endowment of resources. So, resources must be actually must be fixed or has a clear limit. If it keeps on changing, then probably it will be very difficult to model it, and that too the resources, the type of products being exchanged or the trade is being discussed must have had homogeneity in the products. For example, if X we are discussing, that must be identical okay, in all the countries. Otherwise, the qualitatively if things are different, then some country might differ in exchanging their product. And factors of productions, factors here are completely mobile between alternate uses within a country. So, mark it very carefully. So, the factors are mobile within the country, not outside, and that too mobility for their use across the manufacturing units or across the industries, but not across the country. Okay, that is very very important to develop the theory. The next to the understanding of classical or especially Ricardian comparative cost advantage theory, we should also understand factors of production are completely immobile externally, which I said their theory is based on labor, and the unit of measurement of all the products for their evaluation was through labor. So, labor is considered as the value for a particular product. Similarly, the level of technology is also fixed in both the countries. Had it been the case that technology is actually different, then do not you think it is going to be problematic, because it adds number of other possible economizing the production function. It might reduce the cost of the product, and it has differentiation in terms of quality of product. So, therefore, technology is going to inspire things differently. Then some other strict assumptions are the following as well. Unit cost of productions are constant. So, cost of production, the unit change in the cost of production is constant. So, they believe in constant production function. So, basically the marginal productivity of if I just try to understand in two factors, if there are L1 divided by L2. So, this has to be change of this one has to be constant throughout the production function, and if again if I try to also interpret in terms of two products. So, dx1 divided by dx2 should be also constant. So, in terms of production function also assumed to be constant. Here we are going to derive a constant production function. So, no question on non-linearity, it has to be a linear production function. So, we will discuss in the next slide. So, there must be full employment, since resources we have limited and fixed and identical resources. So, they also assume full employment, and classical largely believe on the fact that all the resources are fully employed. So, therefore, less intervention has been or was prescribed during that period. And now, perfect competition in factor market as well as product market, factor market and product market, because perfect competition ensures the price of the product to be constant, and which is set as a minimum most level equivalent to the level of marginal cost, and so therefore, the exporters or the manufacturer or the traders across the different industries, different categories of goods will not find difference in exchanging product so far as the price is concerned or other forms of competition is concerned. So, they assume that the market must be perfectly competitive, and that too competition prevailed in the economy, again stem to the reasons of no intervention. It is the free flow of the market which actually guides and boils down the market to be very competitive. No government imposed, as I mentioned already, imposed obstacles to economic activity. Then internal or external transportation and external transportation costs are also 0. I have already mentioned this point very specifically while we explain this theory. Now, they developed the theory as a 2 by 2 by 1 framework. So, basically 2 country and 2 commodity world, and 1 stands for one factor of production, that is labor. So, these are broadly some of the very important assumptions of classical theory and especially by David Ricardo. So, let me just put you across to you. Suppose I may be making you confused in the question. I may ask you write down two important assumptions which are related to the product as assumed in the classical theory. So, out of so many assumptions, product maybe it should be identical, then product it follows a competitive market model. And if you wish to add further if you are to further specification related to product, then also assume that it follows a constant returns to scale production function, okay, and the production function is linear. Then I have already also said there is the prices of the product due to the competitive market structure led to more or less price to be fixed, and that sets at a very minimum level equivalent to marginal cost. And those are the things you might have read in microeconomics. So, no need to attach further clarifications of why this is equivalent to marginal cost. So, with strict assumptions with such strict assumptions are replaced with more realistic ones in the modern theories. Now, since we are trying to map the transition or the arguments behind static to dynamic models of comparative cost advantage. Now, so those strict assumptions are actually replaced with some realistic ones in the modern theories. That is one of the major difference. So, now the immediate theory which is usually referred as a modern theory of international trade by none other than Hexter and Olin, who examined the effect of different factor endowments on international trade. So, but in the classical we said factor endowments should be fixed and identical. Now, they are saying if they just relax one assumption and mention to the fact that if factor endowments are different, okay, if they are different, and usually they are different across countries, they are different, do not you think so? So, each country poised with different quality of factors. So, accordingly their products would be differentiated. But in this model we will read in our next week lecture where we will talk about the specialization issues, some extent of specialization, but that led to factor price equalization. Their main purpose is to talk about intensity of production and factor price equalization, model. So, we will discuss in detail. Now, revisiting the classical Ricardian model as considered as static is due to the fact that we have assumed certain very strict assumptions, and let there be two countries which has been assumed, which was assumed in this model, and based on that let the total quantity produced as Qx and Qy respectively, and this is for country A and this is for country B. Now, here we are explaining with the help of their production possibility frontier which maps the maximum possibility of productions as generated in economy given a time period of 1 year, keeping other thing constant. Other things like so many other countervailing effects must be actually assumed to be constant, otherwise it is not possible to explain. Now, since it is exhibiting a constant returns to scale function, and that too the substitution effect is purely constant, the unit change of cost of production is constant. So, it is represented with a constant PPF, production possibility frontier, and so it will be linear. Now, to start with how to present it. So, basically we can present it how much maximum maximum amount of qx that can be produced given the total budget of an economy, given the total labor availability in an economy in country A. Now, given that the proportion at maximum could be produced will be of the price of basically. So, if I divide it by the price of that particular factor, price of particular factor which is useful to produce qx, will get a maximum figure. And similarly, if you divide it with the price of that particular factor with another out of the total resources, we can at maximum able to produce this much. If you plot these two, so you will get the production possibility frontier. Now, what is this? This is the total, I mean at maximum at the corner solution, plus this is the total at maximum we can produce. If we add it, so I mean we will get other combinations within the boundary, and of course, those are not the corner points, because we get other combination mixed with both of the products, that is x and y. So, so that will be equal to alpha x plus q x plus alpha y into q y, which is equal to the total resources availability in country A. So, labor availability in country A. Then so the slope will be perpendicular by base, this much divided by this much. So, since this is LA divided by alpha alpha times x whole divided by LA by alpha times of x, sorry, the first one is alpha times of y, we are discussing alpha times y, this is alpha times of x, x is here. So, now LA cancelled, so this will be equal to and since the slope is negative, we have to write down negative. So, minus of alpha times of x divided by alpha times of alpha of y. So, this is alpha of x divided by alpha of y. So, basically this is the price ratio. So, price of x at maximum how much x can be produced, and the or price of y or the factor prices which are used for y, at maximum y can be produced. If you take it, it is basically the prices of not the product prices, it is the factor prices. So, this gives the price ratio of the factors which are dedicatedly used for x and y. Now, based on that we derive a production possibility frontier of country x. Similarly, you can derive the slope of the country y accordingly, or country B accordingly. Here we said country A and here it is country B. Now, you I mean after plotting their respective production possibility frontier, we can infer something out of it. Now, the slope here in the first one is higher, that means just absolute value of the slope or the non-negative value of the slope y, which is actually greater than that of beta of x divided by beta of y, is not it? So, in this case the relative price of x is higher than that of relative x in country A is higher than that of country B. Now, since relative prices of country A, price of x is country A is higher. So, it can be inferred that comparatively country A has advantage in production of commodity y, whereas the relative price of x is comparatively lower or lesser in country B. So, the country B relatively emphasize or specialize in the production of x. So, what will happen after trade? The country A will export y and country B will export x. So, there will be mutual beneficial trade. Based on that trade, the country A can able to add more of X given the Y gets exported. So, country similarly country B can able to add to its basket of commodity Y from another country. So, this would be from another country, this would be Y, this would not be X. Okay. So, this is X, this is Y. So, accordingly we can define the mutual beneficial trade. So, therefore, since both are gaining, so there is a possibility of trade, and trade is mutually beneficial. This is what is observed in the very static Ricardian model. And the static Ricardian model, because static only because of the fact that we considered a number of strict assumptions, especially the production function. Now, over the time period, what really happens, before going to other models, let us try to understand the the maximum range of trade, and the range of trade is defined by their slope, and we know that this is lesser than that of this, and this is their price line also, price line of their product. So, product price lines are also given here, since we are explaining the production possibility frontier. So, the the range will be defined accordingly. So, range is defined as this is lowest one, this is the highest one. So, the terms of trade, which is largely defined as price X by price of Y, is actually interpreted like this. So, accordingly the range of trades is defined, and within that the possibility of trades are taken place. Now, if you go a little ahead with the discussion of neoclassical comparative advantage, since we are emphasizing comparative advantage, so let us interpret in a neoclassical format, where we will be taking the help of production function for sure. Now, the production function as assumed in the neoclassical framework is not linear, and which is very realistic, and the production function exhibit non-linearity, because every fraction of change of one factor cannot be constantly substituted with another factor. So, therefore, there are possibility of non-linearity in the relationship between the extent of substitution between factors and their production function as well. So, it boils down to be non-linear. The production possibility frontier for country A is non-linear, for country B here it is also non-linear. Now, what the neoclassical economies, especially in standard trade model, we are going to read it in the next class, in the next week also, is on standard trade model. Standard trade model, where the very assumptions of the production function has been relaxed and has been considered as quite realistic. Now, they also go by, I mean it is not just production that matters, it also matters how the country also consume, how much they possess with their own endowments. Let be the initial endowment will be at EA, and in country B it is EB. So, based on the community indifference curve, CIC stands for community indifference curve, where it represents a general demand function of the total consumption function for country A and country B respectively. So, given this fact, we will end up with their domestic consumption, and whatever is left they can go for export or import respectively. Now, from here it seems as if the country, now if you look at this country B is more endowed towards the production of X, even we start with that assumption in the static model as well. Now, in country A they are relatively endowed with more of country Y, because the curve is largely tilt towards Y and here it is largely tilt towards X. So, accordingly so the country will specialize, and if you take the price line or the the relative prices of the product. So, this will be, now look at the slope at the point of their endowment. So, and here. So, now it is more steeper in country, it is more steeper, and it is this is actually less steeper. So, relative prices of X in country A is higher, relative prices in country B it is lesser. So, therefore, there will be mutual possible trade, and given subject to the condition that they are consuming accordingly. If they are over consuming, then that of their domestic availability or the endowment. So, they may depend on further import of the same variety even if they have more endowment. So, that is another flip side of the problem, and flip side of the problem, because and that is identified by the modern economist, especially modern economists, especially the neoclassical economist, and accordingly they settle their trade in different format. Now, let us move to the further adjustment. Now, here they will land off depending upon their shift. Why shift is there? Because after trade there will be possibility of settling down with higher benefits, because trade is mutually beneficial. So, dynamic competitive advantage, a country's competitive advantage might change due to the change in supply and demand side, as I just said, in both domestic as well as international markets. What we try to compare here, the simple neoclassical framework largely emphasize a departure from static, as the production function exhibit constant returns to scale, to a nonlinear production structure, and from there they emphasize on their domestic equilibrium level, given the fact that what another country could able to settle with their domestic level of consumption and production. Now, in the dynamic one, especially in the neoclassical framework itself, that they also try to emphasize the change, the transitions from one point to a final settlement point. We try to discuss that. Now, the supply side, now the supply side related to PPF, while the demand side we have already discussed this. So, let us suppose a small country, a price taker in international market, uses its available inputs, labor and capital, produce competing goods and X and Y, and X is labor intensive and Y is capital intensive. Now, we are emphasizing to an extent of the model called Hexcher-Ohlin theory. We will discuss in detail in the next week, and where the intensity of production is discussed. Now, in this framework, the transition effect is emphasized. So, whether X and Y, we have already said is labor intensive and capital intensive based on their PPF. So, given the fact that a product is being actually demanded internally and externally, and their domestic and external demand, so that may lead to different set of if and only if they have different consumption function. If the consumption function is settled or is being demanded at a different level, then they might be net importer even if they are producing more. So, this transition effect is emphasized by the other neoclassical models. So, transition effect might be there depending on the consumption effect. So, we will discuss in detail. At this moment I am just mentioning the movement from A to B, and since we are emphasizing equilibrium in production and consumption function, we will take the help of Opfer curve as well in other class to explain the exact transition effect and to emphasize the dynamic comparative advantage. So, therefore, the neoclassical model or the is actually based on relaxing assumptions. So, some other new models also relaxing the several assumptions. We will discuss some of the other models like imitation lag hypothesis by Posner, Linder model basically on overlapping demand model, flying geese model we will discuss in the next next lecture based on Asian economic experiences. Gravity model where specialization of a particular product based on their geographic location will be also discussed. So, product cycle theory by Vernon, how over the time a cyclical changes takes place and define the trade. Krugman model where we are emphasizing on the economy of scale of production and its consequences in terms of quality of the product, and where we will be emphasizing intra-industry trade and inter-industry trade discussions. Similarly, reciprocal dumping model by Brander in 81 paper, Brander and Krugman paper in 83 are also important. And similarly, what is new then, those all models are actually not negating the comparative cost advantage. So, they have not reduced the popularity of the comparator, or rather they have relaxed some of the assumption and explained the comparative cost advantage. Some economists argue that country's comparative advantage is dynamic instead of, it is not not static at all, it is actually dynamic. Now, so given this fact, we will actually discuss many things based on those relaxation of assumptions in next lectures. Similarly, other factors, as I told you, like role of input matters, friction in international trade matters, transmission knowledge across borders matters, technological difference across borders really matters. So, monopolistic competition in differentiated products with increasing returns to scale also matters. We will discuss in detail, we will take off those individual sections. Many applied economists like Leishner, Kanamori, Balasa paper are also important, some others are mentioned here, you may go through. As a sample for further explaining the empirics of classical or the comparative cost advantage theory, we may take an example of unit labor requirements in two countries, let it be Austria and Belgium. And in the earlier example in the previous lecture, we discussed productivity as the difference. Here we are also discussing unit labor requirements, how much labor is required to produce 1 unit of product. That means, here we are presenting the cost, these are the cost of productions, unit labor requirement to produce 1 unit of steel or brooms. Now, here we can compare the cost of production similar for steel, which this is the lowest cost of production as compared to Austria has lowest cost of production, whereas for broom Belgium has lowest cost of production, is not it. Now, in this case we can easily understand, so if it is unit labor requirement, so we can clarify, since the less for steel lowest is here, so for broom lowest is here. So, there will be mutual trade and specialization is defined. Now, based on this we can define find out the answer. Belgium has a comparative advantage in brooms, Austria has a comparative advantage in steel, and or not, out of all those options you just go through it and since these are other examples I have in the slides, we will carry forward this one to the next lecture, and next lecture is empirical testing of the Ricardian theory, and these are the slides we will carry forward to the next class in detail, and in between you can think of what could be the answer. I will explain these things in detail in the next class. Thank you.